Welcome to a deep dive into Borley Rectory. You've sent over so much on this place: accounts, investigations, even like historical theories. So I guess our mission today is, why does this place, this most haunted house in England thing, why does it still fascinate us?
Well, Borley Rectory, it's more than just a haunted house story. It's not just like, oh, there's a spooky ghost there. It's like this whole bunch of stuff people have experienced. I mean, for decades, right?
Yeah.
Ghost sightings, weird noises, stuff moving on its own. It really captures the imagination.
Yeah, and you sent over some wild descriptions, like a phantom coach and horses and even reports of electronics going crazy. It's not just your typical creaky floorboards, is it?
Hmm.
But that makes me wonder, were these things really paranormal or could there be other explanations?
And that's what we're diving into today. We're not just looking at what people said happened. We're going to look at like why people believe in this stuff, how the media is involved, and maybe some of these things were just like people getting carried away or misunderstanding what they saw.
Right, right. Like any good mystery, we need to look at it from all sides.
Yeah.
So to start, Borley Rectory, it's in Essex, England, built in 1862, but it didn't get its spooky reputation until the 1900s, right?
Exactly. And that's when a key figure pops up, Reverend Harry Price, a well-known paranormal investigator back then. Borley's mysteries, they really drew him in and his investigations. They're a big reason why the rectory became so famous.
And from what you sent over, it seems like Price, he wasn't just watching from the sidelines. He really got involved trying to like talk to the spirits, even leaving them snacks, almost like he was trying to make friends with them. What can you tell us about his methods?
Well, Price's approach, it caused quite a stir, actually. Use a mix of like spiritualist stuff, seances and such, but then also things he considered, scientific,
Mm.
like keeping track of temperature changes or trying to get photos of the ghosts. But a lot of people said he was so focused on finding a good story that it overshadowed any real, scientific process.
So we're already seeing this back and forth, wanting to believe but also needing to be skeptical. But Price wasn't the only one who experienced weird stuff at Borley, right?
No, not at all. You've got all these accounts of people who say they saw or heard unexplainable things at Borley Rectory.
Hmm.
And the most common ones are the high priestess, a woman in black who people say walks the grounds, and then there's this phantom monk.
See, this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because it's not just one person's experience, it's all these different people, each one adding to this Borley legend. And those shared experiences, even if we're, being a bit skeptical, they're incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. Our brains, they look for patterns. They want
Mhm.
explanations, especially when we're dealing with things we don't understand.
Yeah.
So when you get multiple people saying they've seen the same ghost, well, it makes you think about like how we perceive things, the power of suggestion, maybe even like shared
Yeah.
hallucinations.
That's a lot to think about. Okay, so before we get into the specifics of these hauntings, let's talk about Borley itself historically. You mentioned that Price thought the hauntings were connected to a Roman villa, supposedly under the rectory. So my question is, how often are these ghost stories tied to local legends or historical stuff, even if it's not totally accurate?
That's a great point, and it shows how when we try to understand the paranormal, it's often shaped by the stories we tell about the past. So with Borley, this Roman villa idea, even though there's no real proof it existed, it added this layer of history to the mystery, right? It's like adding an extra spooky chapter, even if it's not totally true.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how many other supposedly haunted places have these local legends or historical guesses tied to them. But for now, let's get back to the specific ghosts of Borley Rectory. Let's start with this high priestess. Who was she and what makes her story so interesting?
Well, the high priestess, she's a great example of how these like old stories and ghost stories get all mixed up. You've got this legend, right, about a nun who falls for a monk from a nearby monastery, forbidden love, secret tunnels, and of course a tragic ending. It's like something out of a gothic novel.
It definitely adds to the whole mysterious vibe.
Yeah.
But like we've been saying, we got to separate the good stories from the actual facts. So, historically speaking, is there any truth to this nun and monk story?
That's where we got to put on our skeptic hats a bit. See, this high priestess story, it's popular, but there's nothing that really proves it's true. No records of a nun like that, no sign of a secret tunnel. Plus, the monastery, it was around way before the rectory, like centuries before.
So we might be dealing with a ghost story built on even more ghost stories. And this is where all the stuff you sent over gets really cool. It's not just apparitions, right? It's objects moving, lights acting up, that phantom coach we talked about. It's more than just like seeing something. It's like the haunting got physical. So how do those reports change how we think about Borley?
Those physical phenomena reports, they're key. We're not talking about personal feelings anymore. We're talking about potential interactions in the real world. But we have to think about the power of suggestion here. Imagine, you're at Borley Rectory. You know it's supposed to be haunted. You're on edge. Suddenly you feel a cold breeze. Easy to think it's a ghost, right? Or a floorboard creaks, and it's the high priestess walking around.
It's like what we expect to see or hear can actually change what we experience, especially in a place that already has that spooky reputation. Makes you think, did some people just experience what they thought they should instead of what was really happening?
Exactly. That critical thinking, it's crucial with these cases. And we can't forget that a lot of these reports, they came years, even decades, after the story started spreading in newspapers, local rumors, all that. It gets hard to separate what's real and what's just, in people's heads.
Speaking of real, what about the people who didn't just visit? They lived at Borley. The Price family, they said all this fear, all the weird events, it really messed with them. This wasn't just a fun ghost story for them. It was their life.
And that's a really important part of this that we can't forget. We get caught up in the ghost stories, but there were real people dealing with all of this, dealing with real fear, real stress, the unknown.
It reminds you that a good ghost story is fun, but actually living with that kind of fear, that's something else. And this is where the media comes in, right? You sent all these old newspaper clippings. Borley Rectory was a media circus. How do you think all that news coverage changed how the public saw the hauntings?
Oh, the media's impact was huge. Newspapers, they love a juicy story, right? So they
Right.
print these crazy stories, often just relying on what Price said, which, as we talked about, wasn't always reliable. And that just made people even more fascinated, brought more visitors, more stories, and the Borley legend just kept growing.
It's like this cycle. A crazy story gets printed, more attention, more stories, and on and on. How much of Borley is real? How much is just media hype and people loving a good ghost story?
Tough to say, for sure. But it shows why we've got to be careful. We got to look at the evidence, think about where the information's coming from, and know that sometimes stories get exaggerated.
Now, before we move on to some of the criticisms of the Borley investigations, let's go back to that Roman villa idea. Even with zero proof, it still became part of the Borley story.
Mhm.
What's that say about us? Why do we love to connect these paranormal things to history, even without real
It's
evidence?
like we crave these bigger connections,
Yeah.
even if they're like a little shaky. But we should probably address the elephant in the room here, the investigations at Borley. You were pretty clear in your notes about the criticisms surrounding them, especially Harry Price's work. So what were some of the main issues people had?
Yeah, let's get into that.
Well, the biggest one, and it's a valid one, is that those early investigations, not exactly what you'd call scientifically rigorous. We talked about how Price used some like modern methods for his time, but his critics, they'd say he was really good at finding the evidence that fit his theories, conveniently ignoring anything that didn't.
It's easy to fall into that trap, I guess, in any field. But with paranormal investigation, where things are already so subjective, staying objective must be really hard. Reminds us to always be a little skeptical, even if the person seems credible.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just being objective. Some people even accuse Price of like faking evidence. They thought he wanted to make Borley seem even crazier, maybe for fame, maybe for attention. Now, nothing was ever proven, but it still kind of tarnishes his reputation. Makes you wonder about the motivations behind some of these paranormal investigations.
Yeah, there are always people who'll take advantage of a good story, unfortunately. It makes you think, how many other haunted places have been, like, embellished or even totally made up?
Yeah, no way to know for sure, but it highlights something really important. We got to be critical, look at the evidence carefully, be aware of anything that seems fishy. Borley's a perfect example of that. Be enthusiastic, sure, but don't forget to be skeptical too.
So, even with all the criticism, all the inconsistencies, the maybe exaggerated stories, people are still drawn to Borley. Why do you think this one place, even though the house itself is gone, still has that hold on us?
I think it's because humans, we have this primal need to face the unknown. And Borley Rectory, with its spooky stories, its ghostly cast of characters, its long history, it's like the perfect setting to explore those big questions, the ones we can't really answer. We can be skeptical all we want, but there's still a part of us deep down that wonders, what if? What if there are things out there, forces we can't even begin to comprehend?
That unsolved mystery, that lack of a clear answer, it keeps us coming back for more. And maybe that's the most important thing we get from diving into Borley Rectory. It's not about proving or disproving ghosts. It's about accepting that we don't know everything, about questioning what we see and hear, and being open-minded, but also, like you said, skeptical.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Sometimes the best mysteries are the ones that stay unsolved.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this with me. Borley Rectory, it's quite a story and one I don't think I'll forget anytime soon. And to everyone listening, the next time you hear a ghost story, whether it's whispered around a campfire or read in an old book, think of Borley. Let it remind you to think critically, to question what you think you know, and to embrace the thrill of the unknown. Who knows, you might even stumble upon your own mystery to unravel.